It's pretty wild to think about, but thousands of seemingly airtight criminal cases get thrown out of court every single year. And it's not because of a lack of evidence. No, it's often because of a single sloppy paragraph. Welcome to The Explainer. If you love learning efficiently and you value clear, structured information, well, you are in exactly the right place today. We are completely dissecting Chapter 5 of Dr. Jorge de Jesus's manual, The Officer's Legal Voice, to really understand the DNA of a flawless arrest report. Because writing these reports, it isn't just about checking boxes, it's about crafting a legally bulletproof document.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First up, we've got the weight of the report. Second, the 5-paragraph framework. Third, establishing probable cause. Fourth, documenting Miranda warnings. And finally, describing use of force.
Starting with Section 1, the weight of the report, your sworn testimony on paper.
Listen, an arrest report is absolutely not just some administrative memo that gets filed away and forgotten. It is a permanent legal document. It's your sworn testimony under penalty of perjury that ultimately justifies taking away a person's freedom. And to really grasp why this is so critical, just think about the intense audiences who are going to aggressively scrutinize this piece of paper. Prosecutors needed to press charges, judges are using it to determine bail, defense attorneys are going to dissect it word by word to build their case, and honestly, even civil rights investigators might review it years down the line. Imagine a seasoned defense attorney in a courtroom, right? They zero in on a single omitted detail in your report, maybe something like failing to mention the ambient lighting conditions in an alleyway. With just that one tiny omission, they can start creating reasonable doubt right there in front of the judge. So the stakes here are incredibly high. Every vague phrase is a massive vulnerability.
To really drive this home, Dr. De Jesus explicitly states, every detail you include or omit can have serious legal implications. Your precise language is frequently the only difference between a successful conviction and a dangerous offender walking completely free just because the case got thrown out on a technicality. Your written words are literally the foundation of the entire justice process. And it's just like building a house. If that foundation is cracked with vague wording or contradictory timelines, the whole shebang, meaning the prosecution's entire case, is going to collapse completely.
Moving on to Section 2, the 5-paragraph framework, the architecture of an arrest.
So, the crucial point is, how do you survive that brutal courtroom scrutiny? Well, officers rely on a very specific, logical blueprint. Step 1 is your response and initial observations. Step 2 outlines exactly what led to the arrest. Step 3 details the subject's behavior and any statements they made. Step 4 covers Miranda and any use of force. And finally, Step 5 wraps it all up with the disposition and the report outcome. But you might be wondering, why is this strict chronology so vital? Well, in law enforcement, the human brain under extreme stress processes information pretty erratically. You might vividly remember a physical struggle way before you recall what the suspect actually said to you first. But the court requires linear, irrefutable logic. So this 5-paragraph framework forces an officer to translate a super high adrenaline, chaotic street encounter into a clean, sterile, legally defensible sequence of events.
Let's ground this framework in a real-world scenario straight out of Chapter 5. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. in a dimly lit, narrow alleyway behind a commercial shopping center. An officer observes a male spray painting the brick wall of a store. Now, the moment the suspect spots the patrol vehicle, he tries to bolt. He attempts to flee on foot, but is quickly detained. And upon detention, the officer finds he's carrying this heavy backpack just full of rattling spray cans. We're going to follow this 2 a.m. tagger like a thread through the rest of this explainer to see exactly how this reporting framework applies in the field.
So, you've detained the tagger. The physical work, the running, the detaining, that's all completely done. But here is the narrative hinge of our entire discussion. How do we legally justify this arrest on paper? You can't just jot down, "I caught a vandal." No way. You have to prove it definitively.
Which brings us to Section 3, establishing probable cause, the legal threshold.
So what is probable cause? It requires enough facts to lead a reasonable person to believe a crime has been committed and the suspect committed it. In a legal context, that reasonable person standard basically means someone with average care and prudence, totally stripped of any specialized insider police knowledge. This right here is the absolute, non-negotiable legal threshold for making a custodial arrest. If an officer fails to articulate this threshold clearly in their report, the arrest is deemed unlawful, Fourth Amendment rights are violated, and those charges are going to be immediately dismissed by a judge.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between a bad report and a great one. It almost always comes down to objective facts versus subjective assumptions. Consider this vague justification. He looked like he was up to no good. Okay, that phrasing is extremely dangerous. It leaves massive room for interpretation, and honestly, it implies personal bias or even illegal profiling. Now contrast that with precise probable cause. Observed using red spray paint, the wall had fresh paint matching the can in his hand. See the difference? By using irrefutable, objective geometry and color matching, the officer replaces those vague assumptions with concrete, undeniable evidence. A defense attorney just can't argue with wet red paint seamlessly matching a red nozzle.
To consistently hit that rigorous legal threshold, officers use a probable cause checklist to systematically document sensory evidence. Sight is clearly seeing the fresh dripping paint on the wall. Smell is noting those strong, distinct chemical fumes of aerosol lingering in the night air. Witness or victim statements might be a 911 caller describing the suspect's exact clothing before you even got there. Physical evidence? That's the heavy, rattling backpack full of cans. And finally, admissions or confessions, like the suspect just blurting out a guilty statement. These are the exact ingredients you need to build an airtight legal justification.
All right, so let's say the suspect is fully detained, and we firmly established our probable cause. But how do we document the questioning? I mean, if we want to ask our tagger why he was painting that specific wall, we have to handle his Fifth Amendment rights flawlessly. That takes us to Section 4, Documenting Miranda Warnings, Protecting Fifth Amendment Rights. Chapter 5 outlines what we can call the Miranda matrix. The written report actually has to precisely categorize the interaction into one of these three distinct scenarios. Either Miranda was read and the suspect waived their rights, or Miranda was read and they invoked their rights, meaning they asked for a lawyer or chose to remain silent, or third, no questioning was conducted at all. You have to explicitly specify which one occurred, because if you question a suspect without perfectly documenting that waiver, you run straight into the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. Any confession, any evidence gathered directly from that illegal questioning is getting entirely tossed out of court.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the exact meticulous phrasing required here. At 1847 hours, I read the Miranda warning verbatim from my department-issued card. The subject stated he understood and agreed to speak with me. Why is it so absolutely crucial to state department-issued card? Well, human memory is incredibly fallible, right? Especially during a busy, chaotic shift. Defense attorneys know this, and they will relentlessly attack an officer on the stand, asking how exactly the rights were read from memory. Documenting that you read it verbatim from the official card completely shuts down any argument that you misstated the legal warning. But hey, let's severely raise the stakes for a second here. What happens if the encounter isn't just a peaceful conversation? What happens if our 2 a.m. tiger suddenly panics and decides to violently physically resist arrest while trying to break free? This brings us to Section 5, Describing Use of Force, Precision Under Scrutiny. Let's move to this next example and see how this builds, because use of force documentation is unquestionably the most heavily scrutinized writing in the entire criminal justice system. Everything comes down to objective reasonableness, which is rooted in standards like the Supreme Court's Graham v. Connor decision. So compare this highly subjective, problematic statement, "I took the suspect down." Now look at the objective version. As the suspect pulled his right arm away, I delivered one closed fist strike to his upper left shoulder to create compliance. The text demands that officers completely strip away all that emotional, vague language, pointing out the specific action of pulling the arm away, naming the specific body part targeted, and stating the exact goal of creating compliance legally protects the officer from claims of excessive punitive force. It explicitly shows the force was a measured, calculated response to a specific resistance, not just an emotional reaction.
Finally, we reach the end of the 5-paragraph framework. The report closes with the disposition, which is really all about the crucial chain of custody. For our 2 a.m. tagger, this means formally documenting the transportation of the suspect to the county jail, booking those spray cans into the evidence room under a very specific tracked property number, and officially completing the paperwork. And why does that specific property number matter so much? Because if the chain of custody for those spray cans is lost in the narrative, the defense can easily claim the evidence was tampered with or switched out. This final paragraph ensures that the physical chaos of the arrest is neatly, legally wrapped up on paper.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. When the dust settles on the street, does your report tell a legally defensible story, or does it leave room for a defense attorney to completely unravel it? Because you have to remember, in the eyes of the court, if it isn't documented with absolute precision, it literally didn't happen. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay precise, focus on the facts, and I will see you next time.